Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are joining us from. My name is Toy Williams. I'm the National Training Coordinator for the CDC as a consultant with Carter Consulting, and I would like to welcome everyone to the Workplace Health Incentives webinar. Today we have two great speakers who are joining us to present this webinar to you, Dr. David Anderson and Ms. Sharon Covert. David will be doing the background and issues, and Sharon will be doing opportunities and challenges. As Senior Vice President and Chief Health Officer for Staywell Health Management, Dr. David Anderson oversees the design and validity of Staywell's health assessment and behavior change models. Dr. Anderson brings nationally recognized expertise to the development and refinement of Staywell's systems for health assessment, behavior change, population health management, program evaluation, and financial impact measurement. He also oversees Staywell's research practices and provides consulting expertise on customer programs. Prior to Staywell, Dr. Anderson held management and consulting positions with Control Data Corporation, where he played a major role in creating one of the first successful corporate health management programs. He began his career as Assistant Professor of Psychology at the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point. Dr. Anderson is the founding member of the Health Enhancement Research Organization, also known as HERO. He serves on the HERO Board of Directors and chairs the HERO Research Committee. Dr. Anderson holds a PhD in psychology from the University of South Dakota and completed a postgraduate business administration program at the New York University Graduate School of Business. Ms. Sharon Covert serves as the National Director for the CDC's National Healthy Worksite Program through Veridian Health Management and is responsible for managing regional program directors for various clients and partnerships through the National Network of Wellness Councils, also known as the NNWC. She is a founding member of NNWC and has served as president since 2008. Covert has also served as Executive Director of the Wellness Council of West Virginia for 8 years. Ms. Covert has worked in the field of wellness for over 20 years, designing health and wellness plans, employee benefit plans, and corporate wellness tools. She speaks regularly on the importance of worksite wellness, healthcare reform, and healthy lifestyle choices at state, regional, and national venues, including the American College of Sports Medicine Annual Summit, American Journal of Health Promotion Annual Meeting, and the National Wellness Conference at Stevens Point, Wisconsin. Ms. Covert holds a Bachelor of Arts in English and a Master of Science in Exercise Physiology from Marshall University in Huntington, West Virginia. So again, we would like to welcome our great speakers today for the presentation that they will be presenting in just a minute. I would like to mention that the slides are available. They are on our website, the National Healthy Worksite Program website. They are up and available and will be available for you immediately following the session. We are offering CE continuing education credits as well, which I will tell you how to obtain those credits at the end. So our objectives for today are to describe the types and uses of incentives, designing an incentive-based program, and we will talk about the laws, regulations, and ethical guidelines. And with that, I am going to turn this over to Dr. David Anderson.
Good afternoon to everybody. Before I dive into talking about kind of some background around incentives and how they're being used at the workplace, I just want to cover a couple of terminology items. You'll often hear the terms incentive and disincentive used out there, and basically what it boils down to is an incentive is an anticipated, a key anticipated desirable reward. So it's a reward for somebody for doing some activity or achieving some goal. And anticipated simply means that the proof is in the pudding. If you provide the incentive and it has an impact, then obviously it worked. Otherwise, you go back to the drawing board and say, well, what else could we do that would be effective? On the other side of the coin is a disincentive, and that's really some kind of negative negative consequence or penalty for not doing what it is that it's tied to. Other common terms that are used are carrots or sticks, and you'll hear those thrown around as well. And really, carrots are essentially the incentive. The sticks are the penalties. And carrots are at this point really by far the most popular approach as opposed to sticks. Although sticks have been used probably over the last 4 or 5 years as people really have kind of looked for the right formula to have the most impact out of these kinds of tools. For me, what I will say is, well, in some ways it might be a carrot, it might be a stick, but in the end it's in the eye of the beholder. And if I'm on the end of a carrot and I don't grab that carrot, it might feel just like a stick to me. There are also different types of incentives, and historically, in fact, if you go back to the beginning days of health promotion at the work site, incentives were really there even at that point, but generally speaking, they were small kind of token things, hats and t-shirts and water bottles and those kinds of things that were just little kind of fun rewards for people participating in activities, kind of non-monetary, and of course recognition programs. Oftentimes people are recognized for wellness achievements. They might be written up in company newsletters. They might have testimonials that are shared with other individuals. And so there are lots of ways of doing non-monetary things that can be very effective. And the advantage of those really is they're very tangible, and so people feel them directly, and you can use them very immediately. And in the end, all else being equal, you'd like to make an incentive as immediate as possible. So if somebody completes a behavior successfully, if they complete a program, you'd like to reward them as quickly as possible. And the non-monetary incentives really do have that benefit, as they can be done very, very quickly. Increasingly, however, employers have been experimenting with financial or monetary incentives. And that really started out in the form of cash or gift cards or those kinds of incentives, and they were tied to participating in various aspects of the program. Over the last probably, I'm going to say 5 or 10 years, though, we've seen an increasing use of monetary incentives that are integrated right into an employer's health plan design. And that might be in the form of a premium differential, either presented as a reward for engaging in whatever the behaviors they're tied to, or a penalty for not doing so. Or increasingly, employers are also experimenting with putting monetary rewards into health savings accounts or other types of account-based kinds of incentives. The advantage of money really is that it's a general reward. A person can take the money and translate that into whatever is valuable to them. The downside is it becomes challenging, one, to make it really feel tangible. So if it's cash, typically it's going into a payroll check, and that may be very invisible to employees. And so how do you make that monetary reward tangible, meaningful, and to the extent practical, immediate for the participant? So as I mentioned, non-monetary incentives can be really very cost-effective. They don't cost much. They can be made very meaningful. I've seen their use in the right culture, where even things as simple as the T-shirts, the mugs, the water bottles, plaques, and that sort of thing are very, very rewarding to people, and you can kind of build some really fun activities around them. And employers have done a lot of that over the years. I would say, though, that the trend over the last 5 to 10 years has been the movement not away from non-monetary, because I think those are always going to be there for the fun factor at least, but to more monetary-based, particularly those integrated into the plan design. And the plan design integration really I think the opportunity for the employer is because they can budget the employee portion and the employer portion of the health plan cost. Once they've essentially baked the incentive into the plan design, then it really isn't an incremental cost. It's really a reallocation
of costs from some employees, those who are who do not comply with the requirements of the incentive program, to those who do comply. So in essence, the employees are sharing the cost or bearing the cost of the incentive, and that's really been, I think, a driver for the plan design integration. Another thing to think about, and again, when you're thinking about your incentive strategy, you're looking for incentives that are meaningful to those who are going to get them, because that's the only way really that the incentive is going to drive the activity that you're after. And it's important to keep in mind that different things are important to different people. And here's some research that illustrates that different generations really are more affected, at least overall, by different types of incentives. So thinking about incentives that will appeal to all the way from the baby boom generation that I'm part of to the Gen X, the Gen Y, and the millennials, they may be very different types of incentives that appeal to those categories of folks. This gives you, again, a sense of the kinds of incentives offered. And if you look at this, really, it kind of boils down to 3 or 4 general categories. One is kind of lottery, raffle type things. We've seen those kinds of incentives used really, really effectively if they're paired with a basic incentive that's available to everyone. And so oftentimes an employer will offer a basic incentive to everyone. It might be $100, $200 value, and then they'll have a raffle for a big prize, and it might be something like a flat screen TV or a trip or that kind of thing. And so it's a big prize, but it's offered to very few people. But because of the fun factor and the excitement around the opportunity to get this big prize, you can do a lot of fun promotion around that. And it really, in the end, the research has suggested that you get more bang out of that additional cost when it's paired with a basic incentive that's available to everybody. And particularly the lotteries, the raffle type incentives have been effective in populations where the average socioeconomic status is at the lower end. So lower paid employees are going to be even more attracted, and oftentimes that's a higher risk group that you're really trying to get engaged. So putting in these fun factor kind of raffles as part of the mix provides that added appeal. The other category, of course, is what, as I mentioned earlier, the gift card, the merchandise kinds of things. Those are very, very effective because they're tangible and they can be very immediate. And then, of course, the cash or plan design oriented, as I mentioned, those tend to be increasing. And the other thing you'll see in this slide is most employers are offering multiple different types of incentives. So when you add this up, it's far more than 100%. And the rule really for a typical employer is they may be offering a plan design integration. They may also be offering some type of gift card reward. Again, because that's pretty tangible and can be used to complement the plan design, and they may be doing some raffle things around it as well. So the more different ways you can offer up incentives, the more effective in terms of appealing to the different segments of the population. So again, some more terminology, and you may hear these kinds of terms referenced out there. Participation-based incentives, and basically that's exactly what it sounds like. You're providing an incentive for participating in activity or completing a program. And the advantage really of the participation-based incentives is you can offer them up. They're available to 100% of the population, and depending on the size of that incentive relative to what you're asking the participant to do, you can really approach 100% participation in your program. The downside, of course, is you're rewarding participation, and participation doesn't always translate into outcomes. In fact, we just published a study that showed that participation increases in coaching programs as you increase the reward for completing the program. But in fact, as the incentive gets big, the success rate in that program actually goes down. And the reason for that is the big incentives are drawing in a lot of people into that program who really had no intention of quitting smoking or losing weight or whatever the program is intended to do, but rather they're drawn in to get the incentive. And all they really want to know is how many of these phone calls do I have to complete in order to get the incentive. So that's part of the art of designing incentives. How do you get participation but also get the results you want? And that's where these two other types of incentives have begun to grow. Outcomes-based incentives, again, are exactly what they sound like. They're rewards that are tied to actually achieving a measurable outcome. And that outcome might be a normal weight or a non-obese level of weight. It might be blood pressure that's in the normal range. It might be cholesterol in the normal range, or some other actual tangible health outcome that is where the incentive is tied. The idea there is by rewarding the goal you're looking for, just like with participation-based incentives, you reward participation, you get participation. And the idea here is if you reward the outcome, perhaps you'll get more of the outcome you're looking for. And of course, from the employer's perspective, the other advantage is I'm only providing the award for people who have actually achieved the outcomes. And so I'm rewarding what I want as an end result of my program. The challenge right now is while there's been a lot of participation or research on participation-based incentives, less so on the outcome side. And so we're really learning as we go with the outcomes-based incentives. And one of the concerns has been if the incentive feels like it's too distant for me. You know, for example, if I have a BMI of 40, I'm morbidly obese, I might weigh 400 pounds or whatever the case may be. That outcome may look so far away to me that I simply don't try. It's just I view it as impossible. And that's where progress-based incentives come in. The idea behind progress-based incentives are sort of to bring together the best of what we know about participation-based incentives and outcome-based. And the idea behind a progress-based incentive, for example, for that person with a 40 BMI, rather than saying you have to get all the way to 25, which would be, well over 100 pounds of weight loss, you say, we'd like you to make a reasonable amount of weight loss over the course of the year. And reasonable is a little tricky to define, but if you go out and look at health guidelines, the health guidelines basically say a 5 to 10% weight loss in a year would be reasonable for somebody who doesn't have a medical condition that's a barrier. And so setting that as a goal may make sense. And it's a goal that will look a lot more achievable to people, and hopefully that way people will be drawn into the program. So these are really the kinds of terminology used to describe the various incentive models that are being experimented with out in the workplace. You can see that there is a mass movement towards holding employees more accountable. 62% of employers are now saying they plan on moving from a participation-based to an outcome-based incentives. And again, the idea here is paying for results, which behaviorally makes a lot of sense if you can reward people who makes kind of successive approximations to that final outcome along the way. And if you can deal with some of the things that Sharon will talk about later in the presentation around developing a strategy that's effective but also fair to all employees. So use of incentives, you can see here, is really becoming the norm. On the left side, you're looking at participations or incentives for participation in programs, and you can see that rewards for participation have become the norm at the work site. 62% of employers in 2013 say they're offering incentives for participating in programs. And you can see on the right-hand side, about 20% of employers are using disincentives or penalties for not completing the program requirements, but that's been fairly flat. So it really looks like about 20% are now using it, and for a while at least, no more employers are using it. My guess is as we experiment, if incentives for reward are effective, we'll probably not see any growth of penalties or disincentives, but to the extent that employers aren't getting the outcomes that they're looking for, there may be growth in the future in the use of disincentives. You can also see some trend here related to the size of the employer. Larger employers are more likely to be using incentives in their programs. But you can also see, even in the mid-market and employers lower than 5,000 employees, a majority of all those employers are also now using incentives in their programs. So incentives really have been something that employers have embraced in their programs as a way of dealing with some of the limitations of the past related to getting more employees involved. This just kind of summarizes the science, and there's a lot on this slide. I'm not going to try to go through all of it, but I'll just kind of give you a quick thumbnail sketch of what we know. Michael O'Donnell, who's the publisher of the American Journal of Health Promotion, in 2010 published an article and talked about the fact that we really don't know much yet about the evidence for financial incentives as it relates to improving health behaviors. Most of the research up to that point, and really even today, has been focused on incentives tied to participation. And there we know that basically the rule of thumb is the more you pay, the more participation you get. But whether that translates into improved health behaviors, that's the open question that really still is being, it's really kind of in its early stages. There have been a few studies published, and I'll show you a couple, but really not a lot. Several of the other studies here kind of have the underlying theme is we see that incentives are good at getting people started, but we're also seeing not a lot of sustained change. And that may be due to the fact that incentives can't achieve sustained change, but it may also be due to the way that those incentives were designed. A lot of the focus was around participation, and there you see some initial change, and then maybe that change fades over time. Another study, kind of about 2/3 of the way down, the Severson study, that's actually a study that I was involved in authoring. And what we were trying to illustrate there is it's not just the incentive. Culture and great communications made a huge difference in the effectiveness of incentives at any value. And in fact, one researcher looked at tying incentives to completing a health risk assessment, and they found that in a supportive culture, a $40 incentive achieved the same participation rate in the health risk assessment as a $140 incentive did for organizations that really had not done the work in building a supportive culture underneath the program. So I would encourage you to think about whatever you do in the area of incentives, view it within the context of the culture you're creating at the work site. And if you can build the right culture, it's going to make any dollars you invest in incentives much, much more cost effective. The studies at the bottom, I'm going to talk a little bit more about them in a moment. They do really, the theme there is, while we don't know for sure whether we can sustain change, there are some interesting new studies, these two works by Kevin Vold particularly, that suggest that there is the potential to sustain change at least over a considerable time period. So I'll talk a little bit about that, one of his studies, and this is one where incentives were tied to smoking cessation. And in this particular study, and this was done at General Electric, by the way, Kevin worked with General Electric to carry out this study over about a 2-year period. And the rules of the road here were you were able to earn a $100 incentive. These were cash incentives, by the way, $100 incentive for completing a smoking cessation program. You could earn another $250 incentive for quitting smoking within 6 months after the time you enrolled in the program. So it really gave you a 6-month period where you could take what you learned in the program, decide when was the right time to quit for you, and make your quit attempt. And then finally, another $400. So if you kind of go all the way through this and quit smoking within 6 months and stay a non-smoker at the end of a year, you could earn a full $750 through this program. So what were the and by the way, the smoking status was confirmed by a cotinine test to determine whether the person was a tobacco user or not at the end of the 1-year period. So what they find? Well, what they found was pretty promising. At the 9 and 12 month point, there was a significantly higher rate of smoking cessation. In fact, it was 15% in the incented group versus only 5%. So 3 times as high a smoking cessation rate at the end of the year for the incentive group as for a group that simply was provided educational materials. And even out 18 months, it was about 3 times as high, about 10% versus about 3.5%. So about 3 times the success rate, and then within the course of the program, higher rates of cessation at that 6-month point, higher rates of completion of the program, about a 3 times higher enrollment and completion of the program as well. So in this case, the incentives tied to participation worked in terms of getting people into the program, and the incentives tied to the behavioral outcome of being an abstainer from tobacco use also worked by having about a 3 times higher cessation rate at the end of a year and at the end of 18 months. So what are some of the benefits of incentives? If you kind of took the net of what we know based on research, it does say that incentives are effective. But now let's look at employees and what they believe about wellness programs. Most employees, say worksite wellness is a good idea. But of those people, of the people who say it's a good idea, only about 3 in 10 participate, and this is in non-incented programs. So again, what the employer is looking at is, I need to get more people engaged. How do I get people into these programs? Because the programs are effective if you can get people into them. And so incentives really have been the road towards getting people involved in these programs. And what we found, and again, I've kind of gone through it already, is participation, great. It increases participation. But on the outcome side, on getting those behavioral results that lowers risk over time, the answer at this point really is not that we don't know that that we know they don't work. The answer is that we don't know really how well they do work. There's been darn little research, the exception being some of that work done by Kevin Bulb, and there really has been no worksite-based research published that I've seen showing the results of the outcomes-based incentives. I've heard some really promising numbers kind of through the industry, but of course those are always a little suspect until you really find out the details of how was that work done and is it really showing the results. But the anecdotes out there in the industry are that outcomes-based incentives are getting people more engaged in change, and the change results, at least for those who are participating, are looking very promising. So why are employers using incentives? Well, obviously, to encourage participation and to encourage improvement. I think most employers I'm talking to are saying, I really want to do good programs. I want my employees to have access to these programs, but I also want to have participation rates that make me feel like I'm going to get good results, and I'd really like to encourage people with my incentives, if I can, to actually make results and be able to sustain those over time. So I'm going to shift kind of from what the employers are doing and talk just briefly about motivation, because it's really important to think about what's going on in the mind of the employee as these incentives are rolled out. And I'm going to start with just, again, some terminology. Intrinsic motivation basically means a person is motivated from the inside out. And so they're motivated by what they believe, by their attitudes, by their values, their internal values. And in the end, we believe that in order to get people to sustain health, at some point they're going to have to be internally motivated, or a very, very large incentive would be needed. Because when you think about things like reducing my weight by 150 pounds and keeping it off for the rest of my life to be healthier, you're talking about a really big commitment. And to maintain that and sustain it day in and day out really does require something on the inside, because I suspect the external incentive just can't be big enough to sustain that all by itself. The problem we've got, the dilemma, is that most people don't value their health, or they at least undervalue their health until they don't have it anymore. And that's the dilemma we're dealing with here. We know that we need to get motivation internal at some point, but for people who are basically healthy, they have no health complaints, they have no serious disease at this point, they just don't think very much about their health on an ongoing basis. So incentives have entered the picture as this extrinsic or external motivator, and the idea there is to sort of jumpstart the process to get people started and then hope we can build intrinsic motivation over time. And that's really what the research has shown. The incentives work for kind of simple behaviors, but we don't know if they are going to sustain motivation over time. And we suspect that by themselves, at least practically speaking for an employer, you probably can't have an external motivation big enough to sustain behavior change all by itself. So a lot of the thinking and research is about, so how do we make extrinsic intrinsic over time? And I think when you think about major changes in behavior that have occurred in our society, and I'll give you one really good example, smoking cessation rates in the adult population have dropped from close to 50% back in the late 60s when the first Surgeon General report came out to under 20% today. That's well over 50 million people living in our population today who have quit smoking and kept it off. And you say, well, what went on there? And what went on there really, when you think about it early on, there was a movement really that involved educating the public around the findings, the real research on the harmful effects of tobacco. There was a restructuring of the environment that occurred. So first it was a kind of a corner of a restaurant where you if you didn't want to smoke, you could hang out over there. That became a small corner of the restaurant where you could smoke. And then finally laws that said you can't smoke in these public environments at all. And then of course taxation, which in a sense is a disincentive for smoking. So a lot of things were aligned. And what we saw really was that the culture changed. And where smoking really was glorified, and even doctors were on TV advertising and extolling the virtues of tobacco in the 60s, today that's just not the case in our culture. So we saw a major shift in the culture so that non-tobacco use has really become intrinsic for a lot of people in our society. So the idea here is maybe incentives will buy you some time and help bump things along a little bit while you're building out the culture change that will support your incentive strategy or support your overall strategy, your health strategy over time. This is just some recent Aon Hewitt data that is showing you, giving you a sense of the kinds of things that incentives are being tied to. In this case, participation in health assessment is by far the most commonly incented activity, followed pretty closely by biometric screening. Then you're also seeing increasingly the use of incentives tied to other dimensions of the program. So typically employers today will be offering participation-based incentives across most of the key activities in their programs. This gives you a sense of how big the incentives are out there. And as I mentioned earlier, the shift from kind of cash type incentives to plan design incentives. In our particular client base, what we've seen is once the total value of the incentive got above about $100 per employee per year, that's where the big shift occurred, where incentives larger than that tend to be inside the plan design. And you'll see here that really, regardless of whether it's mid-market or jumbo, the average is somewhere in the $400 range across these employers. This is as of 2012. Recent data I've seen indicates that that's bumped to about $500 average, and the typical range I've seen is sort of the $400 to $600 range of incentive values. Above that, there's some question of do I need more than that in order to kind of jazz my results up to the next level, and it's not clear that you do. So pros and cons. I think one key pro of incentives is they do seem to at least have some initial influence on getting more people involved in the process and engaging in some healthy behaviors. And we think that as part of an overall engagement strategy used in the right way, incentives may play a role in that long-term movement towards creating a healthy culture where behaving in a healthy way is simply the norm and what's expected of folks. I'm not going to go through the cons in detail. The one I'm really going to focus on is unintended consequences. And this is where I would say the devil is in the detail in terms of how the incentives are designed. If you design incentives completely tied to participation with the goal of achieving outcomes, you might not get where you're intending to go. And in the end, you have to get intrinsic. If you're going to move population health, you need to use incentives as part of a strategy to get people internally motivated in order to sustain the change over time. So just summarizing the current evidence, I would say really carefully look at the pros and cons as you're thinking about developing an incentive strategy. There is some research out there, and I think this is what stimulated some employers to jump into the sticks as opposed to the carrots, indicating that people are going to work harder to avoid losing something than they will to make a similar gain. And the caution there is, but they may not like it. And so I think the third bullet here, thinking long term, even though you know that a stick may be more effective in the short term, if you're looking to engage your employees in a positive culture of shared accountability, the reward side may be the better long-term strategy as opposed to the penalty being a better short-term tactic. So really thinking in terms of, how does this incentive fit into my culture, into my leadership style? If you've got a history of accountability and people are used to being penalized for not sort of hitting targets, then maybe the penalty approach is a fit. But for most employers, I think they're thinking long-term strategy. I want to create a positive environment of trust and shared accountability, and that's really where the positive approach seems to be getting employers. So I'm going to stop now and turn it over to Sharon, who will continue the presentation.
Okay, good afternoon. This is Sharon Covert, and I am starting on slide 24, characteristics of an incentive-based program. I want to thank you all for joining us this afternoon, and I don't have the most exciting part of this presentation, but I hope there's some takeaways that you all will be able to use moving forward. First of all, on this slide, we want to talk about integrating your wellness program with other benefit structures that you have, tying the incentives to your program offerings. But I think in general, the important thing is not to front load incentives. So don't give everyone everything for doing one thing. And don't shy away from requiring people to do some things just to enter into eligibility for an incentive program. So keep people connected through some required activity and simplify the range of wellness issues that you usually address. A general structure that permits some individual choices is the best way to handle it in my experience. And I think that keeps everything focused on positives, and it keeps people closely tied to the program, and it feels like it's their own individual program, even though it is a company offering. The guidelines for incentive-based program design is this is a process, and if you remove one brick, it can, the house will collapse. So take inventory of your employees' currency, find out what's important to them, utilize that information when you design the incentives, and that is going to produce participation, engagement, and eventually behavior change. As far as the planning process goes, I like to use the general rules of public speaking. Tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you've told them. So basically, when you hire someone or interview them, talk about your wellness benefits. All throughout the year, remind your employees of the benefits that they have. And at the end of the year, inform your employees of the program, the results, the action steps that were taken, how things were tied to data, what moved, what didn't move, and what the focus will be for the following year. Make sure people know ahead of time what the incentives are going to be, and all the expectations are made clear when the year begins. And keep everything The best advice is to keep the customer service good when you're delivering wellness benefits. You may even want to pilot a program with some of your senior executives or with a test group, but make sure that you do look into potential abuses of a program too. I have seen free nicotine replacement utilized in an unlimited fashion, and employees take it out and sell it on the street corners. So look at things like that. People should always have some skin in the game. So when you plan, make sure that you're thinking of marketing and evaluation from the early part of the planning process, and make sure that you are offering incentives that are considered high value, and keep your communication clear and your customer service good. When you design your wellness program, you need to make sure that you meet HIPAA requirements. I have a list of resources for anyone who wants them. My contact information is at the end of the presentation. And one that you really want to go to is the Department of Labor, DOL.gov. Look at non-discrimination requirements and make sure you always have your legal advisor review things before you implement them. A nice design method is to determine a base strategy to leave room for a variety in the mix. So, for example, a portion of the money could be given during an HRA or screening, or that may even be the requirement to enter a program. Then, depending on the risk stratification, offer different choices. Maybe a high-risk person would be required to go to health coaching. A moderate-risk person may be offered some coaching with other choices of programs that may be online or self-guided or community-based. And then a low-risk person, you want to keep that zero trend model there, keep your healthy people healthy, still have some choices of prevention programs or educational programs to keep them engaged. But remember David's remarks from earlier about different generations and what they value or are attracted to. So limit the number of qualifying behaviors used in a major incentive program if you've got a lot of steps for incentives, but also think about what incentives are important to whom and what your demographic base looks like. So when you do your design, think again about marketing and evaluation from the planning stage. How are we going to market this? To whom will we market it? And how will we evaluate it at the end? As far as implementation goes, I think that this is where senior level support is the most important thing. That is who verifies and permits the implementation as far as including things in job descriptions for your HR or middle management people, assign accountability for delivery, for design, for implementation of a wellness program, tie the plan to data findings that have been shared with employees so that they understand why certain programs took the spotlight and what is at stake for the company. Write a plan that keeps things fluid in case there's turnover on the team or the staff. Select programs that your audience will relate to, and marketing and evaluation plans should be designed when you are developing the program and not as a last minute thing. Flex your design over a period of a year. Move to outcomes within a 3 to 5 year period. Initially, you may want to focus on education and information and awareness, but over a 3 to 5 year period, you want to definitely move towards pushing your people to behavior change. So remind your employees about their status, provide some rewards to those who don't qualify for the big reward. It shouldn't be an all or nothing prospect, and provide great internal customer service to employees, both in telling about the program, keeping them informed of the program, and delivering the incentives and rewards assigned to the program. As far as transition, make improvements and modifications with each cycle of a program. Let people know we're focusing on awareness and education, and we're moving towards behavior change. Be very transparent about this. It's not a trick. Remember some of the creative things that David suggested again, and always include that great customer service. When a new program is rolled out, have fanfare. Let people know this is new, this is different, we're going through a different stage. Be respectful of the timeline that you set, and the emphasis is always placed on participating and directed at non-participants. As far as evaluation, annual evaluation of the incentive feature or the program is very important. Have clear goals of the incentives to make it easier. Again, that's that excellent customer service and transparent reporting of incentive delivery. Look for input, respond to suggestions and feedback. Make sure people know that they've been heard, even if you didn't act positively on their suggestion or their comment. Measure the ROI, the return on investment, and report that. Transparency is key. And make sure that you let people know that you want to keep healthy people healthy. This is not just a program for people who are sick. This is a program for all employees. We value you, value your health. Consider incentive program design. If you look at that report cited there at the bottom of the page, section 12 is about wellness programs and health risk assessments. And it'll tell you 41% of large firms, which is around 200 employees or more for this study, and about 10% of small companies offer at least one wellness benefit. 18% of them provide health risk appraisals. 46% of them use HRAs to identify individuals and encourage wellness participation. So targeted incentives that's a good thing. People should set individual goals. They should be taught to take ownership of their program. We see a lot of our best results with my company, Viridian Health, with on-site coaching and that one-on-one responsibility that people have. Telephonic coaching, also a very good method and tool for moving people through the stages of change, identifying where they are, helping them to select small goals, and to move forward towards behavior change. Take ownership of their conditions. As far as this slide, the takeaway is that prevention lowers healthcare costs. It's a slide with a lot of stuff on it, but that's what it means, is an ounce of prevention really is worth a pound of cure. And that when you have, rather than cost shifting, what you really need to do is focus those dollars, instead of on the back end, increasing deductibles or co-payments or something for employees, focus your dollars and your attention on preventing them from becoming sick and using that health insurance to begin with. As far as increased health plan costs, individuals sacrifice things when their cost increases, and that was a big premise behind David Hom's value-based benefit design. If you have people on one blood pressure medication, they're probably really on 3 blood pressure medications. If their copay is $30 per med, that's $90 a month. Some people rectify that expense by saying, I'll take this one on Monday, this one on Tuesday, and the third one on Wednesday, and then I'll start again on Thursday. And that way these meds last me for 3 months, when actually they're supposed to be taking all 3 every day. So the cost shift, then what happens is that employee is not effectively treating their high blood pressure, and you may have a catastrophic claim out of that individual. So would it be cheaper to give them those meds for $10 a piece, or to give them to them for free since they're a chronic disease medication, or to wait till they have a heart attack and then you've got a 6-figure plus the loss of an employee's time, contribution to the work site, and there's no harm in letting people know you don't want them to have a big event, to have a major health claim. The Public Health Service Act, this is basically just some information that they wanted on these slideshows. The CDC likes for you all to have this information, so if you pull up this slide and listen to me talking on a recording, you have things at your fingertips that you can use. I don't want to spend a lot of time reading to you, but basically, look at non-discrimination, consider the resource list that I have. If you want it, just email me and I'll send it to you. Always have your legal department review your incentive design before you implement it. As far as genetic information, basically, you need to look at the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act of 2008. You need to go to the DOL website and make sure that you are in compliance with this. But it basically prohibits employers and other covered entities from getting family information on an HRA, making you take one where they ask you for family history. So make sure what you're doing with your wellness program is in compliance. Just more information on the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission's guidelines. Covered entities may use the genetic information voluntarily provided by an individual. However, if the program offers financial incentives, the program must also be open to employees with current health conditions and to those individuals whose lifestyle choices put them at increased risk. So make sure that you have your plan reviewed and that you're in compliance with this information. As far as the Americans with Disability Act, you have to basically offer a reasonable accommodation to individuals who may not be able to meet a certain requirement for incentives. So link to the EEOC informed discussion letter that's referenced there. It states that waiving deductibles for people enrolled in disease management is a wellness program. Again, you can't offer incentives for people to provide family history to you. And there was an interesting blog there, also referenced on another slide from an American College of Sports Medicine, that 67% of companies offered wellness, 20% are planning to start wellness. So make sure that if you're going to go down this road, that you do it in compliance. You don't want to cause problems where you don't need to have problems. And this is just more information on EEOC and ADA, that a wellness program is voluntary as long as the employer doesn't require participation or penalize employees who don't participate. And the EEOC has not taken a position to what extent Title I of ADA permits an employer to offer financial incentives. So again, have it reviewed by your legal counsel. Most employers don't have issues with this, but make sure your design is reviewed and is in compliance. You have participatory wellness programs and health contingent wellness programs. You need to consider, what kind of program you're going to sponsor when you do this. Participatory wellness programs are made available to all similarly situated individuals that do not either provide a reward or include any conditions for obtaining a reward that are based on an individual satisfying a standard that's related to health. Not required to meet the 5 requirements outlined in the next slide. The financial reward is not limited to HIPAA, and commonly referred to as participation-based incentive. A health contingent wellness program, on the other hand, will be more affected by some of the other, guidelines that have been implemented for wellness, and that is the frequency of the opportunity for people to qualify for a program, the size of the reward that's offered, reasonable alternatives, and reasonable designs. So a health contingent wellness program is more affected by HIPAA, ADA, and those sorts of requirements. Most wellness programs are not health contingent, but just make sure you know what you've got when you're working on them. As far as HIPAA outcomes, from the American Health Insurance Plans 2012 Fall Forum and the HERO Forum, Building the Business Case for Health Management, you should familiarize yourself with these basics and check out what you're doing. That's the basic premise of these last few slides, is don't just go out saying, hey, this sounds great, this would be awesome if everybody had perfect blood pressure, let's make them do that. Just make sure what you're doing. Make sure your incentive design is in compliance. And the time spent in the planning process will save you a lot of problems on the other end. As far as ACA, there's a brief there that's cited at the bottom that you should look at. It raises the maximum premium discount differential that's currently allowed under HIPAA and clarifies how reasonable designs and reasonable alternatives are defined. As far as ESI and employer-sponsored program, there's some HIPAA premium variation, and again, the whole goal of these programs is keep your healthy people healthy. So prevention and treatment. Prevention's cheaper. So the bottom line for all of these is, if you've got a meaningful incentive, something that your employees appreciate, you're going to have better engagement, better participation. So keep your focus on your employees and what they value, and make sure that you are in compliance and not purposefully omitting anyone from participation. And these are just some more information that the CDC wanted to include here. The bottom line, if you're tying design of your program to the data that you've collected, you're going to avoid most problems with the wellness program. As far as this joint consensus goes, this is where the CDC Health Scorecard and a HERO Scorecard are very useful. You can see where you as an organization rate on infrastructure. You can think about policies and programs and the environment that you have at your work site. And then you consider where to focus about awareness, education, and behavior change. So these tools are also included on the resource sheet that I have. If you want it, just email me and I'd be happy to send it to you. As far as reasonable alternative standard goes, go back to your HIPAA non-discrimination requirements. Again, keep your design related to your data, try to include everybody, and always have it reviewed. Recommendations for elements of a reasonably designed wellness program from the joint consensus that was cited are to plan strategically, remember your culture and organizational support, and again, you can get those rated from the CDC Health Scorecard or the HERO Scorecard. Programs should include assessment and screening, behavior change interventions. Think about engagement when you have your communication design and your incentive design, and plan for marketing and evaluation at the beginning of the program and not after you've already gotten started. A proposed rule provision for a reasonable alternative standard. Remember when we discussed back on slide 27, designing a basic structure and tailoring options based on risk stratification. This is something you should think about. Employees must offer a waiver or reasonable alternative. So if you're going to offer different choices, maybe that's a good opportunity to provide for a reasonable alternative standard. And then this is just more information on that topic. Create incentive designs that consider individual goal attainment rather than ideal targets. And what you really want to focus on is moving people through the stages of change. I'm not considering my health. I'm considering my health. I've decided to make a change. I'm in the process of making a change. I've made the change, and now I'm in a maintenance format. So the idea of health coaching is always a good one for moving people through the stages of change, identifying where they are, taking them from awareness into a behavior change model, and helping them to take ownership of their own health standards. Recommendations for reasonable alternative standards in the joint consensus also include, ideally, employers would create tailored individual programs that would help employees integrate behavior change approaches that they deem valuable, not necessarily something that is mandated by the employer. And as we talked about at the very beginning, sometimes if you keep a general structure that permits individual program choices, you'll get the best engagement from your employees. Some ethical considerations are looked at here. Make sure that you're not intentionally trying to exclude people or to get rid of people, to discourage people, with big health issues from getting treatment or using the healthcare dollars to stay, in good health status. So these are just some examples of things that, you should consider. One being the biometric outcomes are not the measured target. So an example would be employees should not be penalized for high cholesterol levels because some people are genuinely genetically predisposed to high cholesterol. Another one to look at is accommodation for fundamental behavior there at the bottom. Examples, childbearing, outdoor sports and recreation. You shouldn't penalize people for those things. In summary, creating a healthy culture and work environment is a fundamental best practice. So it's not just a wellness program, it's an infusion of wellness into your culture. Various types of financial and other incentives help motivate people, get engagement, which drives behavior change. Incentives have been shown to increase that initial engagement and get simple behaviors to start off. Long-term behavior change requires a sustained motivation and a culture of health in a work site. Incentive research is an evolving field, and support throughout the organization is needed for program success.
Thank you, Sharon. And I want to thank David as well. We had some great speakers today, and they gave us some really good information. So again, I want to thank them for their time. and their expertise. Before we end, I do want to give you all some information. I had a few people ask me about slides. Are the slides up? And the slides are available. So we do have some resources that you can go to obtain information pertaining to worksite health programs in general. And one of them is the cdc.gov/workplace health promotion website. You can go to that website and get some information. You can also go to the cdc.gov/national healthy worksite website. And I'm going to show you that website really quickly to show you some information that we have up right now. So the incentives are here on the home page under Workplace Health Incentives. The slides, the slides are there under Workplace Health Incentives on the home page under Program News. We also have the slides from the program implementation webinar that we hosted last month. You can also register for our upcoming webinar in July on program evaluation. And I'm going to tell you who those speakers are in just a minute. We also have our archive webinars under the webinar archive page. All of them up to last month are available. So if you missed the one for April, it is currently available, and you can go in and listen to that one. We also have our continuing education credits for most of our webinars. There are some that we did not offer continuing education credits for, but if it's available, it is listed there, and you can click on that this link here and get to that website to either register or log in to obtain your credit. We offer general education credit and we offer test credit for the webinar today and for the one last month as well. We will also be releasing an issue brief on incentives. It will be coming out this summer, and it will touch on some of the information that we discussed today, along with ethical concerns and discrimination. And it will have resources available for you in that issue brief. So keep an eye out on our website throughout the summer for the issue brief on incentives. Again, I do want to thank Sharon and David for their help in their presentations today. If you need to contact them directly, you can contact them at their email addresses, david.anderson@statewell.com and fcovert, that's COVERT, @meridianhealth.com. We also want to thank Meridian Health Management for their time and their work with us on these webinars, and I also want to thank RTI for their time and their work with us on these webinars as well. And with that, I will introduce the upcoming Worksite Health 101 webinar in July 15th from 1 to 2:30. This is the final training webinar, and it will be on program evaluation. We'll have Dr. Lori Clough and Dr. James Hersey will be our featured speakers for that webinar. So if you want to register, the link is here, or you can go to the National Healthy Worksite Program website that I just showed you, and you can register there as well. Again, we are offering CEU credit and CHES credit for today's presentation. If you go to the cdc.gov/TCE online, that's cdc.gov/TCE online, you can register to log in, or if you already haven't logged in, you can log in and use the keyword implementation, and it will take you, incentive, and it will take you to the credits for today that you can obtain for today's session. So we did have some questions that came up during the webinar, and I'm going to get to some of those questions right now. So the first question was, how do outcome-based incentives work for people who are already at health goals? This is a factor and seen as fair and wanting to encourage maintaining health.
Sure, I could take that initially, and Sharon could add anything she'd like. In some ways, they work very, very well because the people who are already at those goals. So I'm somebody. If the rules are you need to have a BMI below 30 and a blood pressure in the normal range and cholesterol in the healthy range. If I'm somebody who's already there, I earn the incentive through that achievement. And that may be or it may not be my only requirement within the program. A lot of times an employer will have a hybrid where there are certain elements of the program that are tied to participation and others not. And actually, it was pointed out to me some years ago by an individual who'd been doing these programs for a long time. And he'd been getting employers coming or employees coming to him and saying, I already do all of these things. I don't understand why I have to jump through all of these program hoops and participate in all these programs because I'm doing them on my own. And his response was to integrate outcomes into his incentive strategy so those who were already engaging in those behaviors and achieving those outcomes could earn most of their incentive through those achievements. So that was a design answer to that issue of, well, I'm in that healthy group that Sharon mentioned. Why do I have to do all these program activities? And in the end, it may save dollars in terms of the cost of the program because I'm not investing dollars in people participating in things they don't need to be in.
Yeah, and David, I think too that it's a good opportunity to solidify relationships with like primary care physicians. Maybe I am healthy and all my metrics are good, but do you go see your doctor once a year? So if something would come up, you're getting that regular physical exam, and so you've got that relationship there. So I think that it shows good faith in that you are acknowledging a healthy individual and providing the maximum benefit. But I think it's also an opportunity to really weight those things like having a primary care physician, getting your suggested screening, at the appropriate age and, that they're due. Things like colonoscopies or mammograms, and so to really weigh that prevention too to keep the healthy people healthy.
For sure, and exactly as you mentioned, as you were speaking, the idea of over time shifting the emphasis of your program from participation towards outcomes. I suspect that most of all of our clients are somewhere in that transition. And initially, it was all around participation, but over time, increasing the emphasis on the amount of points, for example, you could earn in the incentive program from achieving the outcomes. But just as you said, having some points that are still tied to some of those basic engagement activities that you'd like people to participate in, regardless of their health status.
All right. The next question is, I have a client with a highly supportive culture of health and well-being. Their health assessment incentive was $40, and over the course of 3 years, we had an extreme drop-off in completion. This year, they are offering $50. How do you sustain participation/engagement rates over time with low-value incentives?
I think that's a question for everybody, David. If you don't mind me stepping in here
Sure.
first. I think you have to keep going back to what people value and what you're saving by getting them to participate, and then consider, whether what you're doing is a valued or not valued incentive. We find, at Meridian that our highest participation rates are with high value incentives. So to have a culture of wellness and to have certain things in place, you have to go back and revisit things like that. What are some more creative ways of drawing incentives towards these individuals to keep them coming back? Because I'm not sure, even though you may have a very supportive environment, if the participation's dropping off like that, there's something missing there. And so you need to go back and reevaluate what you've got, what you're doing, and how well it's related to employees, how well the senior management is enforcing or reinforcing it, and how good the marketing is going and the internal customer services is delivering.
Yeah, I'd agree, and a little bit the devil is in the details on the design of the health risk assessment, but in the end, if you think about certain aspects of the program, like completing a health assessment or going to a screening, from the employee's perspective, once they've engaged in that activity once or twice, they may say, you know what, I already know about that, and that's not something that I need. And so I'm really going to spend my time on program activities. And I'm talking about this within a healthy culture. The employees are then sort of shifting their attention to the things you want them to be shifting to. So if the question is, well, I really want to keep my health assessment participation rates high because that's what I was using to evaluate my program. There are other strategies, design strategies to do that. One of them that I particularly like is it may be in the first year or two of a program that a lot of the incentive is tied to things like completing health assessment and screening, because in the beginning, as Sharon had said, you're really trying to focus on building awareness in the population around their health, around maybe reasons for change and that sort of thing. But once people kind of get that, you'd like to move towards activity and in the end outcomes. And so a design strategy that a lot of our clients have used is once you're sort of through that first couple of years, basically making the health assessment and screening essentially keys that open the door to the incentive. So, for example, no dollars at all in the incentive program might be tied to completing those, but you have to complete those in order to access the incentives. And then the incentives are really focused on those either in the early years of a program, maybe completing programs that are health improvement programs that are going to be attractive to people kind of once they know where they are, and then over the longer term, integrating more outcomes emphasis into the process. So that's a design strategy to kind of get through. Now that employees know about their assessment, their kind of where their health is, they want to focus on changing it, and those things have less value to them, but they still have value for you as a measurement tool. So you can get them in by making them the door opener.
All right. The next question is, if employees don't live somewhere where it is easy to walk, meaning they have to go to the gym to get and stay healthy much harder, how do you address the issue of potential discrimination when using outcomes-based incentives? Particularly difficult for low-wage workers who may have a couple of jobs or can't afford a gym membership to make sustained change, since it depends on the environment where they live.
One of the things I'd suggest is, there are lots of work sites where putting in a fitness center at work is not a cost-effective or practical thing to do, but there are darn few work sites where it isn't possible to set up some small area in the facility for a little workout room, or even, and I've seen this used really successfully, walking trails either inside the building, and sometimes there is just no outside space where it's easy to walk, but walking walking courses set up in the building, or making the stairways, if you're in a multi-story building, making them really attractive and doing some challenges around stair climbing. So I think it's really a way of being creative, and again, that also begins building this idea that wellness is what we're about, and our culture values this, and we're going to structure the environment to give you access to ways of completing the requirements of the program.
Yeah, I agree, David, and I'll tell you, I've seen some really fun things with parking lots, people outlining the perimeter of the parking lot and measuring it off for people to walk, and most places will have a parking lot, although it may not always be safe to walk there. Stairways are another place to really look. I had one company tell me they really had no place to walk. They were on the 16th floor of a building, so there was plenty of opportunity for stairs, even if they didn't walk all 16 flights, to start walking so many flights. So pedometers at work to get credit for the movement that you make while you're doing your job. I think that there's another thing that we're overlooking, and that is go to the employees and ask them what their ideas are. Some of your best ideas will come from the gallery, and to honor them with the idea that you are open to their suggestions and willing to listen. And that goes back to what I talked about knowing your audience, know your employees, who they are, what they do, where they live, how often they do it, and go back and ask them what they think. There's a lot of ideas to be had out there been listening.
Okay. The next question is, are there recommendations for best practice in evaluating economic return for incentives?
Well, I'll take a crack at this. I'd say there probably aren't best practices at this point. In fact, there are some questions over, what my cost really is, particularly once the incentive is integrated into the health plan design. And just to give you an example of why that gets kind of thorny and complicated, suppose I'm an employer who historically has funded 75% of the total cost of my health plan. And I integrate incentives into the health plan, but I do it in such a way that the cost that I'm still paying 75% of the cost, and employees are still paying 25% of the cost. Well, in effect, integrating the incentive into the plan design did not add any cost to me at all. So any return I get from that would be a benefit. So I think really the best practice, to the extent that it exists, is really thinking through and identifying all of the real costs in the program. It's usually easier to measure the benefits than the cost, particularly when you get to an outcomes-based model where you're tracking what percent of your population meets each of the outcomes targets.
Now, there are some good calculators out there to look at, but I agree with David. I don't think we're at a best practices standpoint. And different people measure different things as far as return on investment. But this is another case where you need to think about evaluation in the planning stage. And know what you want to measure, know what it's costing you, know what you're spending to address it, and then know what the bottom line numbers were on the health insurance and the health statuses at the end of the day. And that's going to be your first standard for return on investment.
All right. The next question is, does research indicate there is financial ROI for employers to offer wellness programs? In other words, what's the payoff for the employer to provide a wellness program?
I think we go back and forth with this issue. There are some people who are always going to say that this is an investment in soft dollars, and there are some people who are always going to say, as I will, that once you the prevention, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So, yes, there is research out there. Yes, there are studies, white papers, etc. You can look on the CDC site. You can look on the HERO site. You can look on most of the government sites about studies with tobacco and obesity as far as productivity and health costs and the additional monies to insure go. So the answer is yes. They are out there. I'm not going to, pipe off a list right here, but I'm happy to respond to an email to give you some examples of those.
I'll just add a bit to what Sharon said. There are lots of studies out there, and they're published in peer-reviewed journals, and they're summarized really well in a recent review, I think in 2010, by a health economist at Harvard whose last name is Baker. And colleagues, and essentially they reported an average of $3.27 per dollar invested in terms of reduced healthcare costs, and another $2.50 or so in reduced absence. Now, the underlying theme, though, is none of those studies were perfect, and what it boils down to is these programs are voluntary, and most of the studies compared healthcare cost trends of the participants over time against the non-participants and controlled demographically. So they were really looking at, so what's the participation differential? That's how the $3.27 was arrived at. And it's been pointed out correctly that, because the programs are voluntary, this is not a randomized trial, and maybe those people were just more motivated and would have changed without the program. Really valid concern, and what it says is, in the end, you really got to look at your trend. A lot of the big consulting firms have surveyed and looked at trend of those doing good health and productivity strategies versus employers who really weren't doing anything in that space. And what they report is fairly sizable differentials in trend. So I'd say, from my perspective as a practitioner and kind of looking at the data out there, I'd say the data is pretty good. It's not perfect. Watch your trend. Think about what you're doing and how it relates to trend. If everything is coming together and it looks like the numbers are really getting you where you want to go, then that's what you need as an employer. but be aware also that there is some pretty good research out there that's built a base of support for the idea that these programs, if well designed, well implemented, can provide a really good return.
All right. Well, we're coming to an end, but again, I want to thank my presenters who did a fantastic job today. I can't thank them enough for agreeing to participate. If you do have any questions, you can email them. Like I said, their email addresses are listed here, or you can email us at the program email address, which is National Healthy Worksite at cdc.gov. It's also on the National Healthy Worksite Program webpage toward the top right-hand corner. You can email the program at that website as well. At that address as well. So we want to thank everyone for attending, and we will see you or talk to you in July.